All right. Welcome in to another episode of the Fit Parent Podcast. I am joined today by my buddy, fellow nutrition coach for Fit 40 Nutrition Coaching, which is his own brand for nutrition coaching for moms 40 plus. Bryan Fitzsimmons. Holy cow. That's right? I said that right.
Yeah, you got it.
I had a
You nailed
moment
it.
where I had a momentary panic where I was like, crap, did I forget your last name? Because I always just call you Fitz in my head. I'm like, what's the back half of his last name?
But you're not alone. That's pretty much everybody I've ever been friends with. They're like, Fitz, oh shit, I never made it that far.
I was like, is it Fitzpatrick or is it Fitsimmons? I was like, it's got to be Fitsimmons.
Growing Brian, up a Fitz or a Fitzy, I'm used to it.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, bud. And to kind of dig into, we were chatting before we hopped on, but kind of dispelling some myths surrounding nutrition that are running rampant, and really kind of digging into what actually works. Because I think that I don't know about you, but a lot of conversations I have with people is it feels overwhelming. Is the feedback that I get. It feels like there's so much information. I don't know what's right. I don't know what's best for me. I don't really know what to do. And so then we get kind of decision paralyzation, not able to make any sort of decisions because you don't know what's right. You hear competing points of view and whatever. So I'm going to do an open question from the beginning. What are some of the things as you start working with clients that are, so there's the current noise, but then there's the internal belief systems that we have that we're coming into it that we're not even recognizing. Yeah. So I want to start there because especially working with moms 40 plus, right? You've been eating a certain way for 40 years. Like we're trying to your entire lifetime of eating a certain way. And so there are definitely some ingrained belief systems surrounding food, surrounding nutrition, surrounding weight, surrounding the scale, exercise, all of these things. What are some of the most popular beliefs that you oftentimes have to help your clients unlearn as they start working with you?
Yeah, it's interesting you say this because this comes right on the back end of I just made a mindset course for my clients based on all this stuff. And there are some big ones that always come up. Like the first module is literally the all in, all out mentality, which has been something that Weight Watchers, that all these other types of programs unintentionally start to ingrain. They say in their messaging like, hey, it's like you can eat the right stuff, you can go like do your best with it and everything will be fine. But at the same time, there's this internal pressure of if I miss my points, I'm screwed. If I mess up, I am completely off the plan. And that's the culture that is created through that. Is it intentional? I don't know. Probably not, but this is what these types of programs end up resulting in. Now, another thing too is like believing in that all in, all out mentality when it comes to the fitness side of things is I got to work out 7 days a week or I'm not going to get any results. And if I can only work out twice, then I don't think that's really worth it. When if in reality, the total flip side is the truth, because if you can do 2 workouts a week for years and years and years, you're going to get better results than going 7 days a week for a month. So that whole all in, all out is just, it really needs to be challenged, because the other thing too that comes up is the fact that all in, all out only seems to apply to health and fitness and nutrition, because like the common thing that we hear on the internet that we as fitness coaches have heard a million times is when you get a flat tire, you don't pop the other 3 and say, screw it. Okay. When your kid flunks an exam, you don't give them up for adoption. Like it's not a lost cause. Okay. So why is all in, all out a thing for just fitness and nutrition? Because we want it to be. We want it to be this thing that's like, you know what? It didn't work out. But when we really challenge that and say, what can I do consistently that might not be considered all in, but it will last for years and years and years, that's one of the big changes that needs to be made.
When you think about that, why is the all-in draw so strong? I think it's
Because it's
oftentimes
sexy.
because of the fast results,
Yeah.
right? Like, and so then like the next step for that, I think, is combating. And so how do you kind of go through this of combating expectations?
Yep.
And
Well,
what are reasonable expectations? Because most people, if they've done an all in all out thing, have an expectation that I'm going to lose 10 pounds in 3 weeks. And when you're doing the not all in thing, like let's say that I trust you, Bryan, and I'm going to do what you say, but I then don't lose 10 pounds in 3 weeks like I have before, and now I'm convinced that it's not working. How
yeah.
do we combat that mentality?
Anytime that it's been some sort of an expectations issue, you always kind of fall back on the data, and you need to have enough data to make an informed decision and an informed opinion on how your progress is going. So one of the best things we did was start doing body measurements, and three in particular are the neck, hips, and waist, because what that allows us to do is it can feed into what's called the Navy method, which is a method for calculating body fat percentage, or the Navy SEAL method. And you can get a pretty good idea. It's not 100% accurate, but it's reliable. And you can tell, like, if these numbers change, I'm moving in the right direction. So you can guesstimate using these calculators how much muscle you're putting on, how much actual fat you're burning, how much lean muscle mass overall or lean body mass overall you have. And when you start focusing on those numbers, the scale gets less and less and less valuable, because that's the real problem, is the hyperfixation on the scale. We need to be looking at health from a perspective of, all right, it's more than just this one number. It's a multitude of different things. So when we have like our check-ins that we do, I'll sit, like when we have like a next phase call, I'll run it down and be like, listen, you lost 4% of your body fat. Like I just had somebody on yesterday, and I'm like,
I
so
saw
we're
that.
6 pounds down. Where she was like, yeah, I'm really excited. I'm 6 pounds down. That's great. And I'm like, you want to be even more excited? You actually lost 11 pounds of body fat and you gained 6 pounds of muscle. Now, like I said, that's only a 5 pound difference there as opposed to
Mm.
six. So it's not perfect, but we have a good idea. And she's like, oh, really? And I'm like, yeah. And your lean body mass went up X amount. So now, not only are you not like those people that are going to have a hard time keeping it off, you're going to have an easier time keeping it off because your metabolism is higher because you have a higher lean body mass number. And she's like, oh. So now when we bring some nuance to the discussion and they get the full picture, it's like, oh, okay. And that's why when we have these next phase calls and they're like, oh, I feel like crap, I didn't lose a single pound or I gained a pound. And I'm like, just wait a sec. Let me tell you your other numbers. And they're like, what other numbers? And then we look at the inches and they're like, oh my God, I feel so much better. And I'm like, it's so wild what happens when you get away from the scale and you focus on the measurements that matter more.
When we think about, because measurements that matter more, I think comes back to, again, if you're thinking about for women 40 plus, right? They grew up in the 80s and 90s where there was the, you know, that thin was very much like, that's why the scale is so important, right? Some of the, it's something chic. It's like heroin chic was the, like, in
I
the
was just
idea of
about to
like,
say
which is
heroin
so,
chic.
it's so bad, right? But like the idea of like super duper skinny, and the value being with that number, I 100% agree with you, right? Like that's the idea, is to kind of go away from that and try to look at these numbers that matter more for what it is that they're trying to do. But that's still like we're unlearning a lifetime relationship with the scale versus these other numbers that don't have the same, they don't have the same sex appeal. Like let's be honest about it. Like when we're advertising coaching, right? We don't say lose, 3% of your body fat, right? We say lose 10 pounds because it's an understandable
Yeah.
number concept. People get it, and it's what they want.
Yeah.
And I don't love the fact that I do that. It's one of the things where you kind of have to do some of the things that you don't want to do sometimes in the business. But when we think about like where in the process for you with clients does it start to shift for them, because it's not right away. Like it could be a period of time where they start to see the non-scale victories, whether it's the measurements, whether it's I'm getting stronger, whether it's, hey, I picked up this really heavy thing, whatever it is, where they start to see those as on par or even above what does the number on the scale say.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those times where I know it's very popular to say, oh, I hate the time we're living in. Like everything's so crazy. But at the same time, the focus from heroin chic to I want to be a strong mom or like
Yeah.
muscle mommy or like whatever these taglines are, and just seeing more women in the gym in general is freaking amazing because now
100%.
being strong is a cool thing. Like, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what really that's where the conversation needs to shift as far as people talking about their health and their fitness and everything. It's not how small can I get and take up as little space as possible. It's how can I get to be strong and independent and feel like a badass that's going to carry over into other aspects of life, because that's a way more fulfilling
Yeah.
road.
Well, and that's what oftentimes women are in every other area of their life. They are strong, bad, like as a mom, right? Taking on the world. But then in the gym, it's small and shrink and become less. Whereas in every other area, it's more like
Yeah.
becoming more and empowered in all of these things. And to have that kind of a line, one of the things that I've talked about a lot with clients is like, no, you are this person. You do this in every, like you talked about, in every other area of your life. Like, why is this one area unique for
Yeah.
you?
Because
That's the place where you
it's
don't.
always been the message of just get those light pink dumbbells. We're going to jump on boxes. We're going to do our step aerobics. We're going to do whatever they have. Jamie Lee Curtis and what's his name?
Jane Fonda. Oh, and
Yeah,
Richard Simmons.
not Richard Simmons. Who was it? The guy from Saturday Night Fever, Grease.
John
John
Travolta.
Travolta. Yeah, when they're shaking their hips, I'm like, yeah, I
Yeah.
guess that counts as exercise, but it's not going to really add muscle on. Like that's the stuff that's been marketed over and over and over again because it keeps particularly women in a box and says, okay, this is for you and the weights are for the men. And that really needs to stop. Like it needs to change because women are very welcome on that side. And the thing that scares a lot of the weaker dudes is the fact that women can get just as strong, if not stronger. Like I've got clients
Mhm.
right now where the wives are, or the girlfriends are stronger than the husbands or the boyfriends. And the
Mhm.
husbands and boyfriends are just like, yeah, they bully me. They beat me up.
No, seriously, like in a small group training class that I had this morning, I had, and it's not, this isn't belittling the guys in there. It's raising up the women. I had, we were doing incline dumbbell bench press, which is a bro type move, right? Like we were doing other things, but like that's a upper body exercise. And I got women out there throwing up 40s, 45s, and I got
Hell yeah.
dudes in that same class doing 30s, 35s, and they're on their way, right? But like these women who've trained with me for a long time, and all you have to do is go look on the internet under comments of like women doing anything strong, and anybody who has any sort of size following or any size account, a strong woman doing something strong, you can scroll down 3 comments and you're going to find a guy who's got, forgive me for like a small penis problem,
Yeah. He's got
saying
LDS.
like, yeah, those are fake weights, or like,
Yeah.
oh, too much muscle for me, as if they care. Like they don't care, dude. They
Yeah.
really don't care about your opinion. It's
Yeah.
wild.
there's guys with small members that are almost as small as their minds, and those types of things on the internet bring it out. But when that happens, like if anybody's listening right now and they're like, I never ever want to post a video or something like that, do the like to comment ratio, because if
Mhm.
you see it, we hyper focus on those negative comments and we're like,
Mhm.
oh my god, those assholes, they're horrible. And it's like
Mhm.
on these big accounts it might be 50, 100, but then there's like 10,000 likes and there's like another 1,000 amazing supportive comments, but we
Mhm.
hyperfixate on those little ones. And I think that's
Mhm.
also a fallacy that happens during a fat loss phase, during a fitness journey, where we only think about the negatives. And
Mhm.
that takes a lot of unlearning too, because that's just human. Like it's a stress response. It's like, hey, I'm protecting us mentally, physically, whatever, and I'm gonna be on the search for threats 24/7. And that in itself, that stressor can cause a lot of problems. I notice, especially in the moms 40 plus range, like constantly having the news on, constantly doom scrolling on their phones. And that leads to unwanted food behaviors and lack of activity and things like that. So, not to tail off into a different
Mhm.
section, but like
No.
it's interesting how that stuff all ties together.
When we what we focus on, we bring attention to. And
Yeah.
so the idea of the scale being one thing, right? We're going to notice all of the crazy fluctuations and emotionally respond to each of them. If we have or constantly look at negative stuff, like that's going to be the lens through which we perceive the world, particularly in this area, right? Where you have people who fearmonger for the sake of attention. And so we talked about before we hopped on it, because I just made a video about this week, because it was like, it's the new thing, but like there's always a new thing, right? That people are like, this is the problem, and we pick a fancy sounding something,
Yeah.
and it's right now it's cortisol. 6 months ago it was blood sugar, right? If you spike your blood sugar, then that's a problem. Before that, it was um, your hormone imbalance, and then it was your gut health, and all, and
Yeah.
it goes in and out of these things. And it's not to say that all of these are blanket statement not at all relevant, but the idea that like these are the problem and we have like some miracle solution that's going to fix this problem, like that's going to be where we're like, oh, I didn't even realize that it must be my cortisol that's the problem, and that's why I can't lose weight. When it's like, no, it's probably just like the fact that you're doom scrolling on your phone and you've watched 7 videos about the fact that cortisol is and like you haven't gotten off the couch in a little bit. Like some of these
Yeah.
things, like it's what we're feeding ourselves, like mentally, oftentimes is where we lead into there.
Yeah, and in all honesty, like if you do think it is a cortisol problem, they have doctors for that. It's called an
Mm-hmm.
endocrinologist. You can go and check it out, and if that isn't an issue, then welcome to the majority of people that are not in that situation where it's an issue. Like they don't have some sort of thyroid problem or anything like that. It's just the fact that we can't do the basics for long enough. Because all these people that are like, I'm convinced it's my cortisol, I'm convinced it's this or it's that or it's my insulin, whatever, none of them are currently exercising 2 to 4 times a week, or 2 to 4 times a week, getting enough sleep, getting enough protein, getting enough veggies. Because if they did all of that and they controlled for calories 7 days a week, tracked accurately, and they still are convinced, then maybe they have a case. But if you're not doing all of that, you don't even have the proper scope to look at yourself because you're stuck on the standard American diet that causes a million problems in itself. That's why every single time you jump on any diet that gives you a break from that, you feel amazing. That's why people that do carnivore, vegan, and all these extremes feel amazing in those first couple of months, because your body's like, thank you for stop loading me up with shit. Sorry, can I curse on here?
I mean, I think we're already there. I said penis, so
All right.
I think we're
Fuck,
pot committed.
fuck it. But yeah, this is why like so many people are so drawn to these different things because no matter what you try, you're always going to feel really good because it's a break from really shitty habits. And the
Mm.
second that you stop that and you go back to the shitty habits, you're like, oh, that diet or whatever was so good for me. I just got to get back on it. I just got to get back on the wagon when it's a shitty diet. Like there's a reason you fell off the wagon because it's not
Mm.
sustainable. So it's this never ending cycle.
Well, and the thing about all of those things is this is what I've started to like say it this way. No matter what your hormonal whatever is, all of these things, it doesn't exempt you from the laws of thermodynamics, which are if you are burning more calories than you are consuming, then you will lose weight. Like there's no way around that. Now, the factors that contribute to the calories that you burn and the calories that you consume, those are individual,
Yeah.
right? So like if I have higher cortisol or low testosterone or high estrogen or progesterone or any of these hormones, right? Or hypothyroidism or any of these things, if I'm in perimenopause or menopause or postpartum or any of these things, all of those things can absolutely affect how many calories I'm burning.
100%.
Absolutely, they can. There's also a lot of genetic sides to how your natural born metabolism. There's the things that we can control with your metabolism, like how much you're moving and your lean body mass and all these things. But there's a genetic component to it. There's also a genetic component to appetite and the pleasure reflex, and there's emotional things. Like there's all of these things are factors in those two numbers, but
Mm-hmm.
math is math. And there's
Yeah.
no way to like make your way around that. But what you said was, I think, so important, which is let's eliminate the whether or not like every other possibility before we start searching for the minority things, because if it is one of those things, it's still not going to change the fact that math is math,
And it's
right?
not going to make up for the fact that those other things aren't getting taken care of. Because
Yeah.
nothing, like, I love this topic when it comes to supplements and things. It's like, should I get
Mm-hmm.
this? Should I get that? And it's like, well, what's it for? Well, I want to burn more fat. And I'm like, well, are you in a calorie deficit? No. Are you eating good quality food? No. Do that first. And then what you'll realize is that that's going to burn all the fat that you want. And you don't even need that supplement. So you're welcome for saving you money.
Yeah. Well, and this is exactly it, which is like, hey, if you're eating well and you are doing all these things, you're tracking to some in whatever way, you're moving a lot, you're exercising, you're eating higher quality foods, and you're not like going so far that then you binge on the weekends to make up for it and then just like don't track it because you forget about it, right? Because it's the weekend and things are weird, or you're just sick of it. And if you do all of that and you have a couple of week period like you're talking about with the check-ins, and you're like, hey, the scale didn't move, the lean body mass didn't move, nothing moved, and I was tracking, and on paper I should have lost body fat. Like on paper I should have lost body fat and I didn't. Well, then that tells you that one of two things is happening. Either you're not tracking appropriately, whether intentionally or unintentionally, or something's off. And that's at that point, then we can go have a conversation.
Yeah. And
But until you're, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think a lot of times people get really caught up in this stuff. And let's just be honest, there are some people who need to eat an amount of calories due to being on certain medications, having certain health
Yeah.
conditions that need their calories to be so freaking low that it's unsustainable. And there is a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people like that. But at the end of the day, if you eat the right amount of calories, you're gonna lose weight. You're gonna burn fat. I was listening to Mike Dole and Jeb Stuart Johnson's podcast, and Jeb said something really cool. Like he's buddies with one of the people that does a lot of testing for these bodybuilders that are going to be competing and seeing about their hormone levels and things like that. And he's like, I think it was their T3 levels were bottomed out, like horribly low, but it didn't affect their rate of loss. because what bodybuilders have mastered is to ignore every biological impulse to go off plan. So when somebody's hormones are completely screwed, they feel like shit. They feel exhausted all the time. They feel hungry all the time. And a normal person will give into that and be like, you know what? I'm going to eat. A bodybuilder who's halfway psychotic, because I've been down that road. I've done 3 shows. I know the feeling. It sucks. But you always say in the back of your head, you're like, this is just part of it. And when they have that level of acceptance and stick to the plan, they still burn body fat, even though their hormones are tanked.
Mm-hmm. Well, because the maths, right? Like it's just a factor in those numbers. And so it's like, listen, if I'm not moving the needle, that means that I'm not sticking, either the number's not right or I'm not sticking to the number. It's one of those two things. And so if you're like, I'm not eating enough calories, like I'm eating too few calories, then the problem is, are you actually eating that? That's the first question, is like, is that actually what you're doing? And it's okay if you're not, but like I had a client who was concerned about her hormones, and she was like, I think we need to lower my calories. And I said, okay, well, why do you think that? And she's like, well, whatever results are, and I looked at it and I said, hey, I think the calories were set at like 1,800 or something like that. And she was like, I think I need to get to like 1,600. And I was like, maybe, but let's look at it. And her average calories and not all of my clients track, but her average calories for the last month was 1975. And so it was like, hey, we could move the target, but like you're not hitting the target that we had.
Yeah.
So like, let's maybe look at like, let's hit this number before we try to shoot further away. Like,
yeah,
that's a 400 calorie difference from where you are versus a 200 calorie. Like, if you want to drop your calories by 200, just eat what we said that you were going to eat.
Yep. That reminds me of a really good post Sam Forget put up. He's like, I forget the exact wording, but he's like, if we have trouble hitting a target, what about a more restrictive target makes you confident that that's actually going to work? Like, does that make any sense? And I'm just like, wow, you're spot on.
Well, that's the idea. It's like, yeah, I can't hit, I'm shooting a bow and arrow and I can't hit the target from 50 feet away. Move it 100 feet away and reduce the size by half, and I'm gonna nail it.
Yep. And the other thing to take into account too is, even if, like, technically she should still be in a deficit at like 1970, but if we know human behavior, they've literally studied people and told them, hey, guess how many calories you're eating, and we'll tell you how many you're actually eating. And without fail, every time, humans are shitty at this. They are so bad at this. They were off by 500 to 1,000 calories. There's your deficit right there.
Yeah. Well, and again, if you're in a 200, or, let's say it's that, right? If you're in a 300 calorie deficit versus a 500 calorie deficit, that's the difference between half a pound a week and a pound a week. So a half a pound a week, that's, especially if you're just looking at the scale, that's getting lost. Like, you're not seeing that. Like, you're not going to see a half a pound difference in your average weight over the course of a week, because there's so many other things that cause the scale to go haywire that it's just going to, now, if you can do it for long enough, then that'll add up. But if you're like looking at it week by week and you're like, hey, the scale didn't move the way that I wanted it to move, then it's very easy for that half a pound to get just lost. You're like, I've lost a pound in 2 weeks. And that goes back to the expectations. But it's like, oh man, I did you like, and you won't even really see it. You're like, maybe I lost a pound. And so then it's very easy for, then you take 2-3 days because you're frustrated and you eat higher, and then you can wipe it all out, right? Just like that.
Yeah, and we also didn't even touch on the fact that there's newbie gains. Like, a lot of people are not ready for that, because when you're new to strength training, your body adapts fast. So you might be putting on just as much, if not more, muscle than you are burning fat. Now, on the scale, that's going to read 0 or gaining weight. And you're going to be like, what the hell is wrong with me? But it's part of the process. But nobody wants to talk about that because all these companies are like, you're going to lose weight. You're going to lose weight. You're going to lose weight. And when you don't, they're like, well, sorry. Like, no, you got to know that when you're building muscle in the beginning, it happens fast. And it usually results in you looking leaner, you looking like your skin is tighter, not bulky. So that's always something to factor in too.
Absolutely. So when we think about the target now, because I like that segue, and I love Sam. He speaking of bodybuilders, just for a second. So Sam was, I don't know if he's done it yet. Do you know if he's done his show yet?
Oh, I didn't even know he was prepping.
Yeah, he was prepping at Raise the Bar. So Brian and I had met at this conference, and a friend of ours, Sam, is prepping for his first show, and he's sitting there and like, we're gonna go out to dinner, and Sam's like, or we went for lunch or something like that, and Sam's like, I just had a pound of deli turkey and a pound of watermelon in my room, and I was like, that just is so miserable. And he's like, yeah, my coach told me, this is one of the better nutrition coaches in the world, and he's like, my coach told me, all right, from now on, food is not for pleasure for you. But like, that's the
yeah.
But I say that to say this. When you think about, before we get into the target piece of it, when we think about like the standard, because I think that's another piece of it with what we're consuming, we're often comparing ourselves to people who are doing that.
Yep.
Who are like a different breed of human being. Like, food is not for pleasure. Like, the rest of us who are not prepping for a competition are having Texas barbecue and steak dinners and enjoying ourselves. Fitness professionals who are all in relatively good shape. That's what we were eating that weekend. Now, it's not all the time, but that's what we were eating that weekend. Sam, who's prepping for a competition, is like, I'm going to go out to Texas barbecue and watch you eat it, because I had, from a Tupperware container, deli turkey and watermelon. Like, different breed of human being, and most people are not willing to do that, understandably so, because it sucks. It's terrible.
Yeah.
But that's what's required to look like the people who you see on social media and see on the stage.
Yeah. I love telling people that, like, when I was getting ready, I think it was I did 2 seasons, like 2 shows in my second season, one of my first. When I was getting ready for my second, that I was like in the dog days of prep, and I was studying for my CSCS, so the Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist, which is really hard to get. And there's a section where it was talking about different eating disorders to look out for, especially when it comes to female athletes. Like in high school, it's a very big thing that you got to be conscious of. And one of the things was anorexia nervosa. And I was just going down the list for myself, and I was like, check, 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 check. Like, you literally have to flirt with an eating disorder to get to those levels. And then people see this on social media and they're like, that's what I want. And you're like, do you want the list of things that you need to sacrifice, or the unhealthy habits that you're going to start developing? And then you got to do the work on the back end to realize that that's a really messed up way of living, and go that route. Because if you do, here's the path.
Yeah. Well, the highest percentage, like the population that has the highest percentage of eating disorders, is bodybuilders.
Yeah.
Like,
and we're talking about a male
thing.
Bodybuilder. Like, Sam's a male.
Yeah.
The females have to go to extreme lengths. Like, talk about, like, it's disordered on the male end too, but the females, because of the amount of calories that they're allotted to get to where they need to get to, is absurd. Like, it's basically a guaranteed eating disorder for a certain amount of time, hopefully, but it could extend past that.
A lot of them lose their period. Like, it's nuts. But like, even like, it's not as much of a thing anymore. It's an interesting shift in the world, I feel like, from movie stars to like influencers. But like, it used to be that people were like, I want to look like X movie star, right, in whatever movie. Now it's, I want to look like so and so on the internet. But like, I remember John Krasinski from The Office. I know you love The Office. John Krasinski from The Office went and did a movie where he was a Navy SEAL, and he got like ripped for it, and everybody's like, "What happened to Jim?" Like, and he did an interview, and the guy. Anytime any celebrity does one of these movies where they get absolutely ripped, and they have their photo, right? The talk show host holds it up, and they're like, "What did you do?" Like, this is the narrative of every interview ever.
Yeah.
Right. And he was like, all I had to do is give up this one thing, and it was easy enough. I just gave up fun for 9 months.
Yep.
Like, I didn't do anything enjoyable. Everything I did sucked for 9 months. And you're like, I mean, the product, the outcome looked great. He looked great. But the process is horrific. And most people are not willing to do that, but we want the outcome, but we're not willing to do the process. And then we get frustrated that we don't have the outcome. And I'm not saying that you should want to do the process either, right? Like, there's a middle ground, certainly, where you could be in good shape without killing yourself. But like, we think that it ought to look a certain way, and we're not willing to be like, just eat nothing.
Yeah, that reminds me, I was just watching Iron Claw, and talk about insane shape. Like, Zac Efron got to a different level for that. But it's funny, you're watching that, and being a fitness professional, you're like, he's 100% juicing. You cannot get to that level of lean and that level of muscular with the amount of weight that he put on. It's just physically impossible, because he's been working out for his whole life. And then on the screen, when they're introducing him, they're like, at 6'2", 220. And I'm just sitting back laughing my ass off. I'm like, he's not 6'2", and he sure as shit is not 220.
No.
He's like 170 on a good day.
He's my size.
Yeah.
He's 5'10", 165, 170. But he talked about it after Baywatch, when he got like the leanest I've ever seen a human be. Like, it used to be Brad Pitt in Fight Club.
Iron Claw might have it beat on Baywatch. He was like bodybuilder shredded, like veins on veins.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he was cut from glass, in this, but like, he talked about it. He's like, I never want to do that again. Like, it's so miserable to do that. Now, you can get most of the way there without doing that. But oftentimes we skip, like, when you talk about the all in, all out, black and white, like, there's a lot of gray, but we just skip past it like it's not good enough. I think I said this a while ago, saying like, all right, I'm gonna not, like, it's not worth it unless I can look that way. Like, not that we say that, but like, we think it in our minds, like, I'm never gonna look like that, so why bother, sort of thing. It's like saying, I don't want $1 million because it's not $1 billion. It's like, $1 million would change most people's lives.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that like $1 billion isn't a lot more, but $1 billion also comes with a bunch of headaches that most people don't want to deal with. Like, if I gave you $10 million right now, you'd probably never have to work. Like, talking about Mike Dola, never have to work again. Could live the life that you want to, could enjoy yourself, but without any of the headaches or any of the whatever. Like, you don't have to get like crazy lawyers. Nobody's coming for you. You can have almost everything of what you want without a lot of the headaches, but we skip past it because it's not $1 billion.
Yeah.
That's like saying, 10% body fat isn't that lean, when like you got to be 6. It's like, well, you're 20. Like, life would be a lot better if we moved it a little bit this way. So when we think about moving the target a little bit, not just with the goal or the outcome, but like with the process oriented stuff, that what we're doing, what are some of the like early targets that we try to hit for you with your clients? Because we talk about calorie counting and stuff like that. Is that something that,
when it comes to the early stuff, it's really just oh, sorry, I cut you off there.
No, we got a little bit of a lag there. That was mine.
All good. So in the beginning, It's all about mastering the basics and being consistent with it, because then that gives us the foundation for going past that. So, like we talked about, if there is extra stuff that needs attention, great. But we know we have these foundational things already, so we can make an educated judgment on what the next step is. Now, those foundational things are: one, having 2 to 4 days of strength training in the mix every single week, and two is making sure that we're tracking and understanding how much is coming in, and then three is controlling for quality of food. So I like keeping it simple. I tell people PFC: protein, fiber, color. So if you can get on your plate just a palm, 1 to 2 palms of protein, and you can make sure that whatever carbs you do have fiber in them, and if you can get a fruit or veggie on the plate, that is a perfect meal. That's exactly what I would hope for. And it allows for the flexibility to be consistent, because a lot of people set these hard, strict rules that are impossible to stick to when they go out for dinner, when they order in from somewhere, or when they're going to a wedding. Like, and that sets them up for failure. So if you have these simple things that are like, listen, just protein, fiber, color, is that on the plate? Check. All right, I'm on the plan. We're good. Then that allows you to build up that momentum that's so necessary in the beginning, because you need a lot of wins to prove, hey, I'm turning into this new person.
Yeah, the momentum thing is really interesting because, like, I think about the tracking thing, and I think everybody can kind of go one way or the other on it, but it's just a matter of, like, I think bringing awareness to it. But I think oftentimes that the wins and the momentum piece is when we're not going to necessarily see the results on the scale that maybe we're used to seeing from doing more extreme things. We do need to feel still like we're doing something that is moving the needle, whether or not it's, process wise, we're doing something that's moving the needle. So I love the idea of PFC right on the plate. I'm doing the strength training, right? Like, hey, I'm checking some boxes process wise. I'm doing what I said I was going to do. When you think about, like, you know, now I'm doing it, right? So now let's just say I'm all right. I'm hitting the gym a couple times a week. I'm got my plate, relatively dialed in. Where's how do you kind of refine that piece? Because obviously the consistency piece is important, but oftentimes people start off with some momentum and they're like, "Hey, I'm excited to get to the gym and I'm doing this thing, and it might not feel like enough, but I'm doing it." But then it's like, okay, how do we ratchet that up a little bit to now really start to see the results I'm looking for? Because
Yeah.
sometimes that can make all the difference, but sometimes
Yeah,
we need to
because
go a step
that's a
further.
fun discussion in the beginning, because I love having it with clients when they're like, all right, I got this down, I got that down. Like, what else? And I'm like, that right there where you're at right now, where it's like, okay, this is too easy. Like, what else can we do? Or like, I feel like I'm not doing enough. That's exactly where we want to be. Because if you are getting the results that you want and you're finding it so easy that you're asking for more, that's how nutrition should be. It's not this ever forever long challenge of like, I got to stick to it. I got to stick to it. It's you've nailed these habits and you're in total control. And it's really just a measure of how many calories we're going for. So it depends on what that next goal is. So if somebody wants to burn body fat and lose X amount of weight, then we'll lose however much in chunks. And so we'll go through that cycle of lose it, reverse it, maintain it as many times as that takes, and doing the exact same things over and over and over again. And then if there's other aspects like sleep and stress that we need to address, then that's where that comes in. But as for like going more hardcore on like only eat these foods or these specific macros, it's like, no, you've got that part down.
I think the idea is we oftentimes, going back to it, we oftentimes overcomplicate it. It's it's actually simpler than we can get the vast majority of the results with not as much of the effort here. What's the 20% for the 80%, right? 20% of the work gets us 80% of the results. And so what are those big rock things that we're going to do? And so that it feels easy, because if it feels hard, that's it should be hard to some degree, but not so hard that you're like, I can't do it, because that's why we always fall off. So when you think about
Yeah.
now let's go the other direction. So let's say that somebody's struggling to kind of do some of the fundamental pieces, right? Like, hey, my plate doesn't look like that all the time, or I'm struggling to get into the gym, or struggling to get my movement in. How do you? Where's an appropriate place to start, I guess, and so that it doesn't? Because I think often, I don't know about you, but I tend to start even easier than is reasonable,
Okay.
because I'm the worst the worst thing I can do, and this comes from working on the gym floor, the worst thing I can do with a client who comes into me for their first session is give them an exercise or a weight that is too much, because that's just going to be verification in their brains that they can't do it.
Yep.
I would rather you be like, this is the easiest thing I've ever done, than he buried me in a coffin today.
Yeah.
So now there's a lot of middle ground between those, but where do you feel is an appropriate place to set the target? Obviously you can regress things, but hey, all right, starting point, let's start here.
It's interesting because being a personal trainer for since 2015, same thing. I'm like, let's just start as easy as possible, make sure that we can do the damn thing, and then we'll progress from there. But then when it's when we get into the nutritional side of things, people come in with this insane level of motivation, and I'm like, I don't really want to waste that. So let's do the stuff that requires a little bit of work, like the tracking. That's why I put tracking first, because if people are very gung ho, I'm like, let's go gung ho in the right places, like tracking to a T. Because if you can nail that when the motivation is high, and then as your motivation starts to wean and we add in other habits that are quote unquote easier, then that's going to serve you a lot better. But on the physical side of things, like when we're doing workouts, for example, I'm going to tell them literally just pick the 2-day a week program, just bare minimum, or let's just hit your steps and then go from there. So I think that's one of the ways where nutrition and fitness are kind of unique, where you can play a different approach for each. But that being said, everybody's different. So there will be the type of people where you're like, listen, screw tracking. Let's just get protein on the plate. And then that momentum that we're talking about gets built up. And they're like, okay, now I got some confidence here. I'm going to throw a veggie on the plate now. And we're like, okay, awesome. And then those habits stack up. And sometimes they don't even need to track because they see such great results just from the habits. And then if they do want to take it to that next level, they can. So there's ways to manipulate the order of things. It really just depends on the person coming in.
Yeah. I think that's interesting. I had thought about it, but I haven't done it, because I do it a little bit differently. If I'm going to do tracking, it's usually a month to 6 weeks in terms of volume. If we were going to weigh anything, for the reason that, and maybe it's, different clientele and where they're coming in, but in my head, and I'm just curious your thoughts on this. This is genuinely hey, we're going to lift the veil here, and you guys can hear two coaches have a conversation about how we coach. But in my head, the logic for me doing it that way is, if somebody has never tracked before, and now if somebody's tracked before and they want to start from the beginning, I'm like, go for it. I'm not going to, if you've done it and all your stuff is in MyFitnessPal already, have at it. That's easier for you than taking pictures or doing something else. I'm not going to
That's
stop
the client that we're all like, all right, one less thing to worry about. On to the next thing.
But for somebody who's never tracked before, who's, maybe done more extreme diets or something like that, I tend to be I want to see if we can move what you're doing closer to where we know we're going to end up before we start you tracking, and it feels like an insurmountable chasm between where you are and where we want you to be. So let's just say somebody's eating the typical American diet and they're eating 2,500 calories a day and 60 grams of protein, and I know that their targets are going to be 1,600 calories a day and 110 grams of protein, that's going to feel impossible
Yeah.
in my head. Like that's like, where am I going to find 900 calories and not have it be all about restriction? You know what I mean? Like, all right, I got to cut out all of these things versus kind of looking at what they're doing and be like, hey, if we make some changes, we can kind of backdoor our way into like, hey, now we're at 1,800, kind of just making some of these habitual changes, which I think it can go both ways, but that's kind of my logic behind it. I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't think there's really a right or wrong way to do this. I think it just
No.
depends on what that person like responds best to. And I think for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people, that's a really good way to do it because you're just like, listen, when we get all these things down, tracking becomes easier. Now, I kind of flip
Mm-hmm.
it on its head and go the other way because I like when people try and stick to a calorie budget and then they hit it and then they come back to me, they're like, I'm really hungry, I'm really like, and I'm like, all right, awesome, now we have a motivation to improve our quality of food. So now when I
Interesting.
say, hey, if you want to be less hungry and hit these targets, let's eat some more protein, they're like, okay, that makes sense, that clicks in my head, I got it now. And they'll start doing that, or they won't hit their calories and I'll be like, it's a lot harder to hit when you don't have better food, right? And they're like, yeah. And then I'll say, hey, why don't we try eating like quote unquote clean and see how that goes? And then they come back and they're like, I can't hit my calories, I'm too freaking full. And I'm just like, it's a nice place to be, isn't it?
Yeah. So then let's go this direction. So now let's just say that somebody, and I don't know if you still track or if you have clients who say like, I don't want to track forever, right? Because I think that's a popular thing, and
Oh
we can
yeah.
kind of end and start to wrap up here. But like when we think about like longevity of maintaining, because I think weight loss is one thing, weight maintenance and maintaining results is another thing, and oftentimes a hurdle for most people because a lot of people have lost the weight before but haven't been able to keep it off because they've done one of these name diets where they cut out everything. And so it's oftentimes related to whatever the restriction is.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like it could be a restriction if it's keto around carbs, if it's carnivore, it's on everything. Did you see the thing where he came out and talked about this?
Yeah.
That was wild. If you
I
hadn't
wasn't
heard it,
expecting that in our lifetime.
no. I mean I've seen him move a little bit
Mm-hmm.
on some other things, but for him to come out and just like, I mean, the fact that he owned it is very anti. If you're listening, the guy who basically who literally wrote the book on the carnivore diet and was the biggest proponent of it. I think he's a pharmacist, right? Like
Psychologist
he's
or
or
psyche. What is he?
psychiatrist.
He is a
Who's
psychiatrist.
the
Yeah.
pharmacist? The D. Nicole is the
Oh yeah. Well,
pharmacist.
he's a plagiarist. He doesn't even have an original
Yeah.
thought.
No, he doesn't. But Paul Saldina, the guy who came out there who was like vegetables are poison and do the carnivore diet, went on a very popular podcast and was basically like, carnivore is probably not good for you. Actually, it's probably detrimental for your health for most people to be doing this long term, and it was which is very anti the world right now. People just double down on their dumb crap over and over again because of whatever. So like, props
And
to him, but the damage
all the
might be
people that
already
went to their all the people that went to their doctor with horrible cholesterol scores that their doctors were telling them you are setting yourself up for an early heart attack, and all these people with diverticulitis because they had zero fiber in their diet are all like, what the hell? And it's like, well, that's what you get for listening to somebody that has an extreme approach that goes against the consensus. And that's the key. You got to go with consensus. You can't just go with the one person saying what you want to be right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that goes back to any of these things, right? Like if somebody's picking one thing, it's usually the problem. Like that's your red flag meter, right? If somebody says it's this is the problem, like unless the person saying that the thing that's the problem is people saying that one thing is the problem, like that's what is usually your biggest red flag. If somebody's like, it's this, it's cortisol, it's blood sugar, it's carbs, it's vegetables, it's fruit, it's whatever, this is the problem, it's probably not. Like it's boring and it's not sexy marketing, but it's just like, do the stuff that's worked for forever long enough. But when we come back to why weight, maintaining results, it's usually people can lose the weight because it's about a restriction. It's we restricted whatever, and even counting calories is a form of restriction, right? It's like, hey, this is my cap. Like, I'm not eating more than X calories. Transitioning out of tracking is still, if somebody doesn't want to do it forever, is still kind of like coming off a quote unquote diet, right? And so that skill is necessary. So if you have somebody who starts off really well and they're like, hey, I'm nailing it, and they're doing their calories and they're making great progress, but then they're like, hey, I'm kind of like, that motivation has waned a little bit, and they're not as like, I'm just kind of done with the tracking thing, whatever, it's 3 months in, and they're like, hey, I still have some more to go, but I'm not really tracking as consistently, or they've reached their goal and they're like, I don't want to track anymore. How do you kind of segue people out of that into kind of the rest of their life?
Yeah, I think it comes down to what you were talking about with restriction, but instead of looking at as I'm restricting myself and whatever, looking at more as like your structure for success. Because one thing I left out when I was talking about PFC and the tracking is that right after tracking, we work on meal structure. So I like when people do breakfast, lunch, dinner, and 2 snacks, like the 3+2 method that was made popular by Precision Nutrition and then expanded on by Adam Bornstein. And You Can't Screw This Up. Really good book if anybody wants to learn a little bit more on this. But like having something where you're like, this is just how I eat. And if you can, for example, with the 3+2 method, if you can have a breakfast, lunch, and dinner that are like the size of a standard size plate, no more, no less, and you get protein and veggies on the plate, and then you have that +2 for a snack, for an alcoholic drink, or half of an appetizer, half of a dessert. And that's a way that you keep yourself in check so you can enjoy but not overindulge and go backwards. Then that will lead you to success long term, because as long as you have that structure. Or with the intermittent fasting crowd, there are some people that do really well with it long term because they're like, hey, this is when I start eating, this is when I stop eating. And when they don't eat like an asshole and they just like kind of stick to that and eat some good foods while in that window, they see pretty good success. And when it comes to the people that are like, I only eat clean, and then they have their cheat day or their cheat meal or whatever, they see success with that too. So it comes down to figuring out what you prefer and having that work long term. And on top of all of that, what I like to do is instill like intuitive eating strategies when people are reversing and maintaining, because when you're eating enough calories and you're not in a calorie deficit, you can actually learn how to trust your hunger cues. So if you're eating a maintenance level of calories and you feel full after a meal, you could say, hey, this is good. This is how I feel. And if you're doing that while tracking calories, you know that it's matching up numbers wise and intuition wise. When a lot of people try and just do intuitive eating and their numbers are sky high and they have no idea because there's no matching that. So it really helps to track while you instill good habits and understand this is how that feels.
That's really well said. When we have the idea of, because how I feel is very subjective.
Yeah.
And so if it's like, I feel X, hungry, I feel full, I feel whatever, facts don't really care about your feelings.
Yeah. And you also got to take into account the stuff that makes you feel differently too. And that comes with understanding the process. Like, you're going to feel hungrier when you're stressed, when you're sleep deprived, when you eat processed foods more than whole foods. And you need to know, hey, this is why I'm feeling that way. Not, oh, I got to trust my hunger cues, even though I'm not eating stuff that will allow me to trust my hunger cues or living in a way that would affect them.
Well, that's the key, I think, there, and maybe where we can wrap up, which is the idea that what you said there is the environment. If we have a structure that's set up, and then our environment determines kind of how we fill in that template to some degree. But if the template's not working for me anymore, it's usually not a problem with the template. It's a problem with what I'm filling it with. And or the surrounding nature, because again, the math don't lie. The numbers don't lie.
The
And
math
so
will always math.
if it's not, math will always math. Like we have to kind of own the reality of like, if it's not working, then I need to kind of do the look in the mirror thing and say, where am I the problem in this process? Like I'll say this because I think you'll relate to it, because we both work primarily remotely right now. Like we kind of work on our computers, and we have our clients and we do Zoom stuff and things like that. But it's a little bit of an odd environment that we find ourselves in. And so I was just talking to my wife today about like, man, I'm just, every now and then I have moments of like introspection. I'm like, I feel a little lonely at times. Like it's weird because I was a teacher for 5 years and I was always around people, and then I worked in the gym a lot, and so I was around people a lot, and now I'm a little bit more on my own. I love what I'm doing, but it's an odd thing. And she was like, well, what do you think? And I'm like, well, I kind of have to look in the mirror and be like, what's my role in this? Because it's not up to everybody else to reach out to me. It's not up to other things to come to me here. I'm in charge of what I do here. I'm in charge of the things that I am doing. Now there's environmental factors certainly, but how I respond is what I'm in charge of. And if I am responding a certain way, then I can't be upset with the consequences of my own actions to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, I hear you on that, because I feel it too, where you're just like bogged down on the computer and you're like, I haven't had any human interaction today. And that's literally the reason I do my podcast, because I'm like, I get to talk to people and shoot the shit and actually talk shop, which I miss from being in a gym environment with other trainers. And also why I will forever have a certain amount of in-person clients, just to be able to be like, I had some FaceTime with somebody today, whether that's over the phone, like I did this morning with my one lady, or which I'll be doing when I'm in North Carolina. But like, hopefully when I move, I'll get at least one or two people to come to the garage and work out. But you need that.
Yeah. I think, but that's kind of the final piece of it, which is when we think about the template of the meals, right? It's also the template for the rest of our lives. It's setting ourselves up for success, to make like success the default mode.
Yeah.
Like, an easy one is thinking about nutrition, right? Like, hey, upstairs right now is grilled chicken in my fridge that I did over the weekend that I can just, it's quite easy. It's quite literally easier for me to make a healthy meal than it is for me to go get takeout. I am 2.5 minutes away right now from a healthy meal versus I'm 20 minutes away from takeout.
Yeah.
So if I can make the environment around me, the community around me, all of these things kind of like all pointing me toward what I'm looking to do, and the template is set up for me as well, then it's just a matter of like, okay, I just have to do what I'm set up to do, versus like almost it requires effort for me to not do it.
Yeah.
To not do the plan. Like if it's harder for me to not go to the gym if I've told I'm leaving right now, like at 9 a.m. on Thursday, I'm going to the gym. Like, you got the kids. It's like, all right, well, the expectation's there. Like it's almost harder for me to not go than it is for me to show up. So I might as well just show up.
It's amazing how much smoother this whole thing goes when there's planning, when there's like just a little bit of foresight to be like, okay, I got X, Y, and Z going on, so I'm going to do this, this, and this, rather than getting to the end of the day and being like, shit, what am I going to eat? Or, oh my God, I didn't get my workout. But that's how a lot of people operate.
Mm-hmm. But we don't do that in any other area. So I said this, I was on John V's podcast.
I've worked with a few people that operate that way when they work. So,
well, when they work, but like you think about moms or parents, like you don't really often do that with your kids.
No. You know their whole you know their whole social schedule.
The whole schedule, like they're not showing up somewhere without food. You know what I mean? Like you're going to feed your kids. Like you have the skill to plan ahead and plan meals and figure out how to do it on the road because you do it for your kids. So like we have to be the adult in our own lives sometimes and be
Yeah.
responsible for our own actions.
I tell the moms all the time, I'm like, you need to treat yourself like another kid. Like, you really do have to put yourself in that mind frame of, okay, I am developing this new person, and that's another kid. And I got to treat them the exact same way. I got to feed them well. Because I forget who said it the other day, but it's like a lot of people just, I think it might have been Mike Dola. He was just like, a lot of people just need to eat how they were taught to as kids. Like, eat your damn vegetables.
Yeah. Well, there's it's a famous book, right? Everything you need to know, everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten, right? Isn't that the famous book? It's like everything you need to know about nutrition you learned as a kid. Like, but the idea of like everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten, like share, like be kind to others, like all of those things, like you learn it from a very basic age. And like the things that I'm teaching my 4-year-old and 2.5-year-olds are like, no, you don't get a treat unless you have your dinner.
Yeah.
Like, no, you can't have ice cream because you didn't have your dinner. Like, no, you can't have another thing of fruit snacks. Like, no, you can't.
Yeah.
Like,
And
you can't have milk for the 50 or like another thing of apple juice. Have water.
yeah, and to that
Like,
point,
what are we
what
talking
you're
about?
just describing right there is a form of mastering the resistance, because anytime we're told to do something differently than what we want to do, there's that pushback. There's that FU response. Like, no, I don't want to do that. And it's like when you're a little kid and you're like, I want a cookie. Parent says no. And you're like, I want a cookie. And it's like, you have the parent to say no, but when you're an adult, you don't have that. And it really comes down to mastering the resistance, because it's going to be there. It's a thing that happens. It's a normal human response. But like I tell the ladies, I'm like, you got to master your inner toddler. When it's screaming and saying, I don't wanna, like when a toddler says, I don't want to go to bed, or I don't want to brush my teeth, you're like, okay, we're doing it anyway.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's like The Rock. It doesn't matter what you think.
But that's how it's got to be on your journey sometimes. Like when you're instilling these initial habits, like when you're forming the competence around these things, there's resistance in the beginning, and you just got to say, this sucks and I don't want to do it, but I'm doing it anyway.
Yeah. No, this is like I say this a lot because this is a concept that I've been working on, which is like we are toddlers with just maybe a little bit more of a filter. Like we never really grow out of that. Like we want what we want when we want it. But the idea of like when my kid says, I don't want to put my shoes on, but we're going outside to play. I'm like, shoes are required for going outside. So like you're not going to go outside unless you put your shoes on. So if you want this, this is the requirement. And so the idea of like, hey, you have to decide what you want more. Do you want to not put your shoes on, or do you want to go outside? Like those things are mutually exclusive. Like you can't not have your shoes on and go outside. Like you have to do both. And so the idea still holds with our fitness. If you want to change your health, your fitness, your body composition, whatever it is, if you want this, the requirement is you got to put your shoes on. Like you got to do the thing that's required of it. And if you don't, then you can throw all the tantrums you want. It doesn't change the fact that shoes are required for going outside. Like eating protein is required for looking lean and toned. Exercise is required to being healthy. There's no exceptions to that rule. Like it needs to happen. And if you want it, then you decide which one you want more. And if you decide you don't want to put your shoes on, if you decide you want the ice cream more, that you are free to make that choice. but you also have to be okay with the consequences of those
And
actions, which are we're staying inside.
that's the key word there. The fact that it was a freaking choice. You're not a victim to some emotion that you're having or this trigger response you have in the moment. You take the time and you're like, listen, I do or I don't want this. I'm in control. I have the power, and this is what I'm deciding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because we also do things that we don't want to do.
Yeah. We pay taxes. Nobody wants to actually give
Go to
that
work.
chunk.
No. No. But we do it because we're not willing to we're not willing to pay the consequences of not paying the taxes by going to
Well,
jail.
some are.
Like we're some, but the idea is like, yeah, we have to be. It's a matter of being more conscious of it, right? And if we have a template, if we have a setup, right, then it becomes, if we're not making infinitely many choices in the day, then it becomes easier for you to like be a present in the harder choices as they come up. Like if I'm choosing every single meal like the moment of, that's going to be hard for me to make a quality choice every time. But if I like kind of know, I've planned my meals, I have my template, I have all this stuff, I know my workouts, and all I got to do is just show up, then when the rare exception comes up, then I'm making a decision versus 50.
Because you don't have that decision fatigue. You're like, all right, just this one.
Just this one. Yeah, I just got, and now I can make it with some like presence and think it through and be okay with the consequences. And or if you make a decision that you don't love the consequences of after the fact, like you don't love how you feel, whether emotionally, physically, whatever it is, you can be like, oh, okay, well, that wasn't the decision that I want to make in the future.
Yeah.
Versus giving your kid up for adoption because they flunked one test.
And this actually brings up a good thing. I know you want to wrap this up, but I can't leave this out because it's so helpful.
Yeah.
If anybody has found themselves in that situation where it's like, I just ate that thing and I don't really understand why the heck I did it because I didn't want to, but I did it anyway, get a journal. Like, it is one of the most valuable things along this journey with getting in touch with why you're doing the things that you're doing. Like, it really works well for people that suffer with things like binge eating when it's not like clinical level, but it's like to the point where it's not good and you have some sort of control over it. So whip out the journal and just write down while you're having that craving or when you're about to binge, what are you feeling in the moment? Are you avoiding something? Are you like trying to mask something? Whatever it is, and then decide, do I want it? And then if you eat it, jot down, what do I feel like? Why did I do this? Now looking at it again, why did I actually do this? And just kind of go down that rabbit hole of why. And you write down some surprising stuff. Like I found out that one of my clients was eating food because she was avoiding intimacy with her husband. And it's like, how would we have known that? And then it came down to, oh, it's not that the binge eating is the problem. It's the fact that I need to have an open discussion with my husband. And it's like when that happened, all of a sudden the binge eating stopped.
That's wild. But it's not unique. Like it's not an uncommon story that this is related to so many different things. The way that I think about this, I don't know if you've thought about it, but I'm sure you've heard of like the traffic light I call it the traffic light protocol, but like red, yellow, green in terms of the quality of food. It's precision nutrition's kind of big thing. And we can kind of wrap up here because I got to run. We've been going for a while. I mean, we could chop it up for a while. But the idea is, like we think about food in terms of its quality, red, yellow, green being, the highest quality food, yellow in the middle, red being a little bit more processed. And they all have a place. But when we think about kind of qualifying our food, there's other factors that are important to think about, which are our emotional and physical satisfaction from the meal. Like that was really yummy and satisfied me, and how I physically feel. Like, does this make me uncomfortable? So an example would be, and you don't want 2 red lights. So an example would be like, I don't know what's going on with this. I got balloons going. But like an example would be ice cream if I was lactose intolerant. So ice cream is going to be red on the objective quality spectrum. That's fine, right? Probably green on the emotional and craving satisfying thing for most people. But if I'm lactose intolerant, it's also probably red in how I feel, right? Like I feel like trash physically. So that's probably not a food that I should be regularly incorporating into my thing versus something that's maybe pizza. I don't know if pizza bothers people that are lactose intolerant, but for me, pizza, right? Hey, red light quality, green light, and then if I have a at least ability to stop eating it, then it's still I don't feel bad after the fact if I have my pizza. And so it's a little bit of thinking through like both beforehand, but then also after the fact, like what was this? Did this satisfy anything for me? Or did it kind of halfway do it? Like, all right, I wanted something. It's like the chips that are at the party, right? It's like, all right, did I really, those are red quality. I felt fine, but like, I also didn't really enjoy them all that much, right? Then we can just be a little bit more, oh, hey, is this actually something that I want to quote unquote spend my currency on?
Yeah. And it's all about that awareness.
100%. Well, Bryan, thanks for coming on, man. We ripped. I mean, we could have gone for forever, but solid 75 minutes here. Where can people find you to get a hold of you?
Well, I think we're gonna have to do another 75 minutes on my podcast, get you back on. So if anybody wants to, if anybody wants to check that out, that's the Fit 40 podcast. And then my home hub is really the Fit 40 family on Facebook. That's my Facebook group, and across all socials at coach_FITZZ.
There you go. Yeah, we did an episode on his. It's probably a year ago now, so you're gonna have to dig back through. But there's a ton of. He's got some pretty fantastic guests on there, and it's just great.
It's great wild resource. How many people say yes.
People just want to come and talk, man. It's wild. Like I've found that too. I've had people now who are like, when am I coming on? I'm like, I mean, whenever you want to, I guess. I didn't realize that this was a thing, but sure, whenever you'd like.
We're all so lonely. We're like, please ask.
Yeah, please talk to me. Well, Bryan, appreciate you coming on, bud. We'll hopefully see you soon. Are you going any of these things in the fall?
I'm trying to. I want to go to Luca's in Seattle. I think that's in September or October, but being with the move going on and everything, I don't know how it's all going to hash out. I'm always last minute with this crap. So we'll see. Yeah. We'll find out.
Yeah. I haven't I can say it here because she doesn't listen, but I haven't run any of this by my wife yet.
That's tomorrow's problem.
We'll figure it out. Yeah, that's future Jeff's problem. Let that poor guy figure it out.
Pray for future Jeff, everybody. If you do nothing else,
for future Jeff. Well, appreciate it, bud. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, talk to you later, man.